The killer app of Bitcoin is the store of value in cyberspace. And what's that worth? There's about $900 trillion worth of wealth in the world, and about half of it is used for its utility value. People buy assets for their utility. They buy houses and buildings and boats and planes and pieces of art because they want to use them, look at them. But the other half of that wealth is assets that are purchased as a long-term capital investment or as a store of value. If I take you and I drop you in Africa and I say, here, take $100 million, buy anything you want anywhere in Africa, but you got to keep it for 30 years. Then what if your choice is I can have $100 million worth of Bitcoin in cyberspace? If I can have $100 million worth of digital property, or I can have $100 million worth of land in any country in Africa, or any building or any company or any bond or any currency in Africa. You know, one of the rules of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin's on a need to know basis. You have to need to know about Bitcoin before you'll open your mind to it. The first time we figured out how to channel energy in cyberspace, it's just as profound as if you went to somebody in 1800 and said, you know, one day we're going to have this clean, silent electricity, and you're not going to be able to see it or touch it, but it's going to power every single machine in your factory, and it's going to power everything in your house. And you would think, you know, I don't get it, I don't need it. And until someone shows you what it can do, and until you get to the point where you do need it, you're not going to embrace a new form of energy. And so MicroStrategy didn't really need Bitcoin until 2020. And then during the COVID lockdown crisis, we realized that all of our capital was kind of a melting ice cube. We had a lot of money that was generating 0% interest, losing 15 to 20% of its value a year. So we had a need to know. And then we started thinking, maybe there's something else we can invest this money in. And we discovered Bitcoin, which I think is digital capital. I mean, the most powerful application of digital energy is capital. So we needed it, we found it, we embraced it, and we've become the largest public holder of Bitcoin. The killer app of Bitcoin is the store of value in cyberspace. And what's that worth? There's about $900 trillion worth of wealth in the world, and about half of it is used for its utility value. People buy assets for their utility. They buy houses and buildings and boats and planes and pieces of art because they want to use them, look at them. But the other half of that wealth is assets that are purchased as a long-term capital investment or as a store of value. So $450 trillion of the world is long-term capital. And so if I take you and I drop you in Africa and I say, here, take $100 million, buy anything you want anywhere in Africa, but you got to keep it for 30 years. And, then I say, or you could have the same $100 million invested in the US. Most people would say, well, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to keep the money in the US. There's nothing I want in Africa that's as valuable as property in the US. But what if you can't have property in the US? Then what if your choice is I can have $100 million worth of Bitcoin in cyberspace? I can have $100 million worth of digital property, or I can have $100 million worth of land in any country in Africa, or any building or any company or any bond or any currency in Africa. And the answer, when you think about it, is there's nothing you want in Africa that's better than having digital property in cyberspace. And there's certainly no place where you're going to trust your money or your assets for 30 years, much less 100 years, much less 1,000 years. So when you start to ask the question, where do the 8 billion people on the planet and where do the 300 million corporations on the planet, where are they going to store their capital if they don't have recourse to the United States and, property on the Upper East Side? The conclusion you come to is I'm going to put my money in cyberspace. And so Bitcoin's real use is it's digital property in cyberspace. It is cyber Manhattan. It is a place where you can store your capital and give it to your great-grandchildren. And you know that you're not going to be taking risk against a bank as a counterparty or another company or country or currency or culture. When you don't want to take risk, when you don't want to make an investment, uh, when you don't want to bet on the direction of the commodities market, when you just want to store some money for 100 years and forget about it, well, you put it in the safest bank in the universe. So after 16 years, it has been copied 10,000 times. They all failed. It's the winner, right? It's the network that all the smart, rich people in the world chose. It's the bank in cyberspace. If you show up in a city and there's 10,000 banks and you have a bunch of money, and the question is, which bank should you put your money in? You go find every smart, rich person that you know in the city and you say, hey, where do you put your money? And if they all put their money in one bank, you're probably not going to put your money in a bank that's a million times smaller than them, that only has poor, stupid people. So it was copied. It's the winner. It is the bank that's of choice of the smart money in the world. And will it be banned? You couldn't know that for 15 years, but the IRS legitimized it as property in 2014. The SEC approved a host of Bitcoin ETFs in January of 2024. Today, it's held by nearly 100 publicly traded companies. Every major regulator has certified it as a commodity, not a security. That was a judgment by the former head of the SEC under Trump, and that's the judgment of the current head of the SEC, Gary Gensler. So it's not getting banned. And that takes us to the third question is, will it be hacked? And Satoshi's got about $70 billion in a bunch of wallets that any hacker could have if they could crack the code. And it's been there for 16 years and nobody's cracked the code. It hasn't been hacked. And the reason it hasn't been hacked is because it's defended by a wall of digital energy, about 730 exahash. That's more computer power than all of the computers that Amazon or Microsoft or Apple could, working jointly together, could generate. So it is the strongest wall of computer power in the world, stronger than any nation state can muster, stronger than any company can muster. And that computing power, combined with the fact that there's approximately $800 billion of actual money deposited in this bank over the past 15 years, combined with hundreds of millions of holders, combined with about almost 20 gigawatts of electricity, which is like 20 full-on nuclear reactors. 20 gigawatts is more electrical energy or more pure energy than drives the entire U.S. Navy. That's how much power it is. So Bitcoin's really defended by power, a lot of power in political, economic, digital, and electrical form. And there's no way to finesse it. You can't kind of spoof it or trick it. You just need 10 times as much computing power as exists on the surface of the earth in order to crack it. That's why no one's cracking it.
And how do you get yourself comfortable around it, not really understanding for sure its origins?
There's a dream throughout the history of the human race of sound money, of money with integrity, something you could trust, something that you could store your life savings in and not have debased or destroyed or stolen from you. And that sound money took the form of gold after about 5,000 years. And throughout human history, the better civilizations have stood on the gold standard. And economists have always tried to create the perfect money. Gold was the closest thing to perfect money, but it was always imperfect because you could mine more gold and it's centralized. It was easy to steal gold and it was very slow to move. It would take a year to move gold. So there was this dream in the economic community of perfect money. And it was impossible to create perfect money or clean, sound money until the invention of the internet, combined with the invention of public-private key cryptography, combined with the invention of semiconductors. And so Bitcoin represents the engineering of perfectly sound money. And it was only possible once those three technologies advanced. And there was a group of cypherpunks that were playing with cryptography, playing with the internet, and they saw the development of hashing algorithms like SHA-256 and the ability to build that into an application-specific semiconductor. And they probably tried this 40 times. There were products like Hashcash and Digital Gold and Bit Gold and things like that. And the first 30 or 40 of them failed. And then after about 40, some Bitcoin came along, and Bitcoin learned from the failures of the 40 before it. And it was the first truly decentralized crypto monetary network. And it was lucky because it just had the right monetary policy, which is absolute scarcity, 21 million. And it had the right frequency, a block every 10 minutes, the right bandwidth, the right protocols. And, when it was launched in January 3rd of 2009, did we know it was perfect? No, nobody knew it was perfect. In fact, it didn't trade for a year and a half almost. And the first time it was used for transactions was Pizza Day around May of 2010, where somebody bought 2 pizzas with 10,000 Bitcoin. So at that point, 10,000 Bitcoin, $700 million worth of Bitcoin was traded for 2 pizzas.
Yeah.
And then people thought, well, maybe it's something, but it's still kind of a hobby. And it took another decade before it wasn't a hobby.
Walk us through why you think there's so much appreciation coming.
Yeah, we created a model which we uploaded to GitHub. It's in the open source community. It's called Bitcoin 24. You can just Google it and go grab it. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and it has macroeconomic models for the next 21 years, a Bitcoin forecast for 21 years, and then micro models for corporations and individuals and institutions and even nation states. And once you download that model, you can plug in your own assumptions about what you think is going to happen, and you can come to your own conclusions. But my assumptions are the US dollar supply is going to continue to expand about 7% a year. And that is the historic rate of expansion of dollars for the past 100 years. That's how I arrive at that. That's just how fast the money supply is expanding if you look at M2. And I think that there'll be innovation from AI. So some things like equities will probably grow a little bit faster because AI is going to have a boost to equities. I think over time, gradually, technology is going to demonetize gold and some of the other stores of value assets that were used in the 20th and the 19th century. But the 21st century, we're going to digitally transform property and transform gold into digital property, digital gold.
Okay.
And when you look at Bitcoin's growth over the past 15 years, it's been growing more than 100% a year for the first decade or so. And for the last 4 years, it's been appreciating about 50% a year in ARR. I think it's 50% a year in ARR, and it's 50 vol, which is like 3 times the volatility of the S&P and 3 times the performance of the S&P index. Okay. Over the next 21 years, I think it will grow faster than the S&P, and it's going to grow to the point where it's about 7% of the world's assets. Right now, it's about 0.1% of the world's assets. And I think that it will gradually approach, but it will never be as big as the S&P index or equities. It won't ever be as big as real estate. But in that world where it decelerates from 50% down to 20%-ish, it will appreciate from 65 or 70,000 up to 13 million a coin in my base case. And that amounts to about a 29% ARR on average over the 21 years. And when it's half the size of the S&P, it'll still be twice as volatile, probably performing 50% better, because it's a 24/7, 365 asset. It's subject to global chaos and global capital flows, and it doesn't have all the risk factors of property or the risk factors of equity to hold it back.